Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me for sensory activities to improve attention in neurodivergent children. That's a mouthful. I am Penny Rogers. You can find me at Our Crazy Adventures in Autism Land or at Special Needs Homeschooling. And today, let's talk about what is a neurodivergent child before we move on. Neurodivergency means that their brain is wired differently. It could be ADHD, it could be autism, it could be anxiety. Anything that causes them to learn differently makes them neurodivergent. So that's what I'm talking about. If they have sensory processing disorder, or most people immediately think autism when you say neurodivergent, but it could be ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, things like that. So that's what I'm talking about when I say neurodivergent children. When it comes to neurodivergent children, actually with any child, in my opinion, you have to think about their overall sensory system and how the vestibular and the proprioceptive inputs play a huge role in that system. Those two inputs are probably the two most important inputs that you should have extra control over, or you should know their needs. Because if you don't understand them, and a lot of people don't, then kids have issues, or they can have problems that are brushed off, misdiagnosed. They can be seen as bad kids or hard to manage kids, or the kid that teachers are excited don't come to school that day. So a lot of times when you have children like that, it's just because people don't understand that their vestibular and proprioceptive needs aren't being met. So this, of course, affects your child's education, because no one can learn efficiently when their sensory system is firing on all cylinders and then some, and they're not getting those needs met. So that's what we're talking about. Let's start with vestibular input. Vestibular input is the sensation caused by any change in position, like in direction or movement, whatever, of the head. So think inner ears. You know, you get motion sick when the fluid in your inner ears starts to move around. So that's what you're thinking of. That's why it's canals filled with tiny hairs and a bit of fluid, because your inner ear fluid is what helps your vestibular system work. So when our head flies around or when it flops, it acts as a trigger because the fluid is moving, which tells the brain that the entire body is moving. And sometimes it's just the head, but that's what it tells the brain, is that the body needs movement. So for a kid who needs vestibular input, we would call them a sensory seeker, or that is a child that seeks out input. This could be a child who runs, who jumps, who everywhere, who climbs everywhere, who just can't sit still. A lot of times with the ADHD kids, it's the H, the hyperactivity, that they're talking about. But if they have the right vestibular input, then that activity is going to tone down the hyper part so that they can learn better. They never get dizzy. They are always running and moving. They can't sit still without moving their legs, or they can't sit still without something moving, or they just can't sit. Some kids just can't sit. They're always spinning or climbing. They want to be on the swing set. Lots of, when they do self-soothing, it's usually things like rocking back and forth or pacing back and forth. It's always some sort of movement. So when you think of vestibular input, you're thinking inner ear and you're thinking movement for that. That's what we're looking for. So vestibular input affects other areas other than your sensory system. It affects your visual motor skills and body awareness. Now, what is body awareness in this sense? That is knowing where your body is in space. So knowing where your body is and how to control it, and if you're in an elevator, or knowing where your body is and how to control it when you're sitting at a desk or you're playing, as opposed to playing outside. That's what we're talking about. And all children, regardless of special needs, whether they're neurodivergent or they're typical, as we call them, all children they just need time rolling and spinning and crossing the midline to teach their brains how their body moves through space or how their body moves through the environment. If you have a child with terrible vestibular input, they will be floppy. Floppy means that they have no idea. They get really, really close to you. They have no idea of personal space. They have no idea where their body's going to go if they turn. So they often seem clumsy. So all children go through that. It's a phase all children go through. They're clumsy. They don't know where their body is. They hit their head on things they shouldn't hit their head on. Most children, though, will grow out of it because their brain quickly learns through their vestibular system how their body works in the space, so it adapts. Neurodivergent children, their brains are wired differently. We've already talked about that. So what happens is that because their brain is wired differently, the vestibular input may not necessarily go to the right portion of the brain to teach the brain how their body moves through space. So that's why they seek vestibular input, because their brain is trying to compensate for that, and it makes them a sensory seeker. It's not a bad thing. It's just that it's different. So what we like to do for vestibular input activities, handstands with feet against the wall. A lot of neurodivergent children, though, will have, or I have found that the neurodivergent children I have worked with, including my own, can have hypotonia, which means low muscle tone. Part of that is because they have a vestibular input or vestibular system deficiency. So they may not be able to do a handstand with feet against the wall. If they can, it's a perfect way to do it. It helps the liquid go to the brain, and for the brain to understand that the body is still against the wall and sort of learn where it is in space. You can also do cartwheels if they can. I am 50 years old. I still can't do a cartwheel. Never have been. So if they can do cartwheels, it's great. Jumping on a trampoline, roller skating, riding a bike, swimming. Swimming actually is perfect for vestibular input and proprioceptive input that we're going to talk about in a minute. So if you have access to a swimming pool, that is wonderful. The only thing you have to be careful of is that if you swim in chlorine too long, their bodies will not be able, anybody's body will not be able to detox it quite efficiently. So you'll start to see some behaviors. And when you see those behaviors, just add Epsom salt baths and magnesium to their diet or to their routine. Don't have them eat the Epsom salt bath. No, have them take an Epsom salt bath and or rub magnesium cream on them, and that will help with that. Horseback riding or hippotherapy is perfect for vestibular input. It's also perfect for working on the hypotonia, the low muscle tone, because when you're on a horse, you have to engage your core. There's no way around it. You're going to fall off the horse if you don't. That's why the first time you go horseback riding, you're like super sore the next day, because you've used muscles that you didn't even know you had. So rocking on an exercise ball, you can get those yoga balls really cheap at Walmart. So you can rock on an exercise ball back and forth, and that helps them practice yoga. Fun kids yoga cards. I'll put some links in the description for that. You can pretend to row in a boat, and what I like to do is put two little chairs, like he's in front of me and I'm behind him, and we take our hands and we go back and forth, like, and then we rock back and forth. The vestibular input you're looking for here is the rocking back and forth. If your child can skip, you could do skipping, galloping, running, jumping rope. All of these things help with vestibular input. Be cognizant, though, of your child's challenges. Don't ask your child to do something that he or she is not going to be successful at, because that's not what we're going here for. We're trying to get them the input that they need so that they can learn, they can be calm and learn. A calm child is a child who can learn. So that's what we're trying to do here. So don't ask them to skip if they can't, if they're still galloping. Skipping is a higher level skill than galloping, and galloping is a higher level skill than running. See how they sort of go together? So you would start here, and then he would work on this here, and then they would move on to skipping. And then if you're really good, you can move on to cartwheels and handstands. But I never did that either. So you can live 50 years as I as I'm showing you, without knowing how to cartwheel. Who knew? So the proprioceptive input here is the sensory input gained from your joints, muscles, and connective tissues pushing together. This is where brushing and joint compressions come in handy because that's the kind of input that you want. These receptors, and my face is in the way, I apologize for that, tell the body, tell the brain, help tell the brain where the body is in space. So this particular one, though, as opposed to the vestibular, which sort of made them less floppy and less clumsy, this particular one helps them gain motor control and body awareness and things like that. So they're going to need like gross motor control, where that's how they learn to ride a bike. Gross motor control is where they learn how to kick a ball, things like that. Proprioceptive input is what works on that. What does it look like for a kid that needs input, that has a proprioceptive deficit? They're constantly asking for hugs, or they're coming up and they're giving you a hug, but it's super tight, like a bear hug. Like they're not just coming up and hugging you and then walking away. They're coming up and squeezing because that's what they want you to do, because that's what they're craving. So they're coming up and they're giving really big, firm hugs. They're leaning on people. They have no concept of personal space. None, nada. They play too hard. Sounds kind of crazy, right? No, they don't know that they need to take a break because their proprioceptive input isn't telling them to. So they just play and play and play and play and play until they drop and they sleep or they become cranky. There's no happy medium between I'm going to play outside, I'm going to get hot and thirsty, and I'm going to come inside and get a drink and cool off, because there are two systems actually at play for that particular example. The proprioceptive deficit, I'm too hot, I need to go inside and cool down, and I'm thirsty. They could have most neurodivergent children do not feel thirst or hunger, things like that, or they don't know what those sensations are in their body to go ahead and say, oh, I'm thirsty, let me go get a drink. So there's an input that thirst and hunger belong to. It's completely eluding me right now. So they struggle with complex gross motor skills. We talked about these. Walking upstairs 1 foot at a time. That's a gross motor skill that your child needs. If your child still goes upstairs by putting 1 foot on the step and then putting the next foot on the same step, and then this foot goes on the step, and then this foot goes on the same step, then they're lacking gross motor control. You want to be able to, most people walk upstairs 1 foot, 1 foot, 1 foot, 1 foot. That's how you get upstairs. That's when you have control of your body in space. See where I'm going? So that they have the gross motor control. Kicking a ball. So if they're playing kickball, if they want to play soccer, they need gross motor control. Jumping jacks, jumping rope, things like that will need gross motor control, because let's do jumping jacks. You need to move your arms one way and your legs another way. Jumping rope, you need to move your hands so that the ropes come over. Anything that is, we would call multitasking, your body is doing two different things at the same time, is gross motor control. And if they don't have the right proprioceptive input, they're going to be unable to do it, because one, their brain doesn't know where their body is in space in order to achieve that function. And then they don't know, because their brains are wired differently, how to make different parts of their body work differently at the same time. So it's the old rub your belly and pat your head. Yeah, they can't do that because of proprioceptive input. So what do we do? What do we do if our kids like that? We smile, and we remember that proprioceptive input plays an important role not only in the gross motor, but in self-regulation and their posture, where their body is, coordination, speech, and the ability to focus. It's pretty important. So we need all of these things together in order for our child to be successful in those things. And you would never think self-regulation, posture, body awareness, things like that. But if they don't have the gross motor control, then they're clumsy and uncoordinated. They have no body awareness. They can't Like I said, make their hands move one way and their feet move another. All of this can be calming. By getting the input, it can be calming for neurodivergent children. And it can be stressful for those who are sensitive to sensory stimulation. So you know your child best. Watch your child closely while doing some activities that we're about to talk about. As soon as they start to get frustrated or they look like they're getting overwhelmed, or as we say here in autism land, they're losing one of their spoons, you're done. They have enough input and now they're getting overwhelmed. You don't want to go from a deficit to too much, because then you're going to have the same problems. But if you give them the right amount of input that they need, if they happen to need proprioceptive input, then what you're going to do, like we said before, a calm child is able to learn. So when the nervous system, or the vestibular and the proprioceptive and all the other sensory systems, are firing at a normal rate or a regular rate, then your child's able to be calm and learn, because he's not using all of his energy trying to figure out why he's not getting, he needs to bounce. He needs that input, or he's an oral seeker, so he needs some gum to chew. His brain can focus 100% on what's happening in front of him. So some proprioceptive input activities are crawling along the floor. You could do crab walks, which is just where you crawl on your hands and the bottom of your feet. It's really fun. Push-ups, playing tug of war, carrying boxes of books. Do you see a commonality here? This is all heavy work that I'm talking about. So when you hear someone say, have your child do heavy work, this is what we're talking about. Push-ups, where they use their body weight, to push up and down, is heavy work. I would fill a backpack with some books and let Logan carry that around if we didn't have his weighted vest. Weighted vests or weighted blankets are a great proprioceptive input item. Running, blowing bubbles, like I said, tight hugs. But if you can't, do tight hugs, because let me tell you, once your child gets to a certain age or girth or height, I don't know how to say it, but a certain size, they're going to hug you harder than you like. And there will come a time when they may or may not hurt you. So that's why you need to have this taken care of before they get there, because when they're 5 years old and they're bear hugging you, you can handle that. They're like 3 foot tall. You can handle that. They're really just hugging your legs. When they're 15 years old and they're 6 foot tall and they've got like 50, 100 pounds on you and they start hugging you, that could break ribs. That could, dislocate your shoulder. That could hurt you. So you want to make sure that you have the weighted blanket and the heavy work, or the things like that. The weighted vests, already compression shirts are perfect for that. Compression pants, socks, whatever. They want to be tight, because that's how they learn that where their body is. They can feel their body being enveloped in that tightness, and that helps them to not have to use that part of their brain to keep their body together. I hope that makes sense. So you want to do that. Another heavy work activity would be carrying a laundry basket. So oftentimes I would fill the laundry basket with his clothes, and then he would carry it to his bedroom and put them away. When he got older, when he was little, he would just carry it to his bedroom, or he could carry the dirty clothes to the laundry room in the basket, or I would put something in the basket and ask him to take it upstairs or whatever. So carrying a laundry basket around is great. If they're very young, or if they need a lot of proprioceptive input, or if they're easily distracted, you can carry the basket together with him on one side and you on the other, trying to walk at the same pace. And this really works on proprioceptive input. You're not expecting perfection here. Remember that. You're just expecting them to get the inputs that they need so that they can go about their day successfully. The trampoline and swimming and yoga, which was also in the vestibular, are perfect for proprioceptive as well. Chewing gum, perfect. If you have an oral seeker, chewing gum, drinking milkshakes, or any thick liquid through a straw helps get that proprioceptive input, because they're working for it. Gardening, of course, swinging. If you have a sensory seeker and you do not have a swing set, please tell me that you have access to one at the park or whatever, because swinging, either inside or outside, you can get an indoor therapy swing, is they love it because they're seeking that input, and it's easy to get. It also helps them to regulate better when they can swing. It's sort of like a calming stim. We don't stop stims in autism land unless they are going to hurt themselves or someone else by doing it, or it's inappropriate. You don't want your kid running out in his underwear when grandma's home, or grandma's come over, or the mailman's there or something. But other than that, rolling a pen around, pacing, jumping, flapping their hands, all of those we don't stop unless, they're flapping their hands so high that they're, slapping people in the face. And then we actually don't stop it. We sort of move them to a safe space. So yes, they're seeking proprioceptive input at that point. So when should you do these activities? So I naturally incorporate these activities into my child's day. It's called a sensory diet. And what I do, it has nothing to do with food. I know based on what we're doing at that particular part of the day, what kind of sensory input he's going to need. So I make plans ahead of time for him to get little breaks for him to go do it or her to go do it, so that they don't get anxious or distressed. Or I watch the children as we're going through lessons for signs that a sensory break is needed. When they start to get wiggly in their chairs, floppy, they start being silly, not answering the question, things like that, then we're going to stop and take a sensory break. I want to pause right here because we are talking about homeschooling, that you don't have to do your lessons at the table or at a desk, or even in the house. I've watched one of my children do their math upside down in the recliner. I've watched a child do his free reading while walking on a treadmill. That one was pretty impressive because even I can't do that. We have done math facts and science while in the pool. We've sat outside and looked at the clouds together and then listened to our book. When you have a neurodivergent child who has intense sensory needs like that, you need to think outside the box on where you're doing your lessons and making sure that they are getting their sensory needs met at the same time. You can do stuff on the trampoline. You can do lessons while they're swinging. I mean, it's your homeschool. Make it your homeschool and make it work for you and your children. So I like to make, as they get older, I like to make them more aware and responsible for their sensory diet. Now, when they become adults, they should be responsible for their sensory diet, unless they're completely unable. But certainly, they can learn how to meet some sensory needs as soon as they get them. This can look for them like self-soothing techniques of flapping their hands or rocking back and forth or pacing, or they may have a vocal stim, something like that. They're meeting their sensory needs when those things happen. Absolutely. So that's perfect. If your child can, then as they get older, make them aware of when they need to start doing a sensory activity to meet that need, or when they need to stop doing math. It's easy to see. It's easy to see when any of my children are frustrated. They all give different clues, though. So one gets really floppy in his chair, he could fall out. One starts chewing on things that he shouldn't be chewing on, like his pencil or the book or his shirt. One starts to lay her head down and just lay right there on the table. And then one, you could just see it on his face, and he starts to grunt and hit himself. So your child, the cues that they give you when they need a brain break, and they have brain break cards. I'll leave it in the description so you can see the ones we use. But they just take a card and they do the activity on it, and then they come back. These little sensory breaks don't have to take hours, and they don't have to be so elaborate that you're never going to get it done. It can be as simple as go get a piece of gum, go go eat some pretzels, go jump on the trampoline for 5 minutes, run around the house 3 times, roll on the floor, go get your weighted vest, things like that. So 30 seconds, a couple minutes, half an hour. You don't have to get school done in a set limit, a set amount of time. I mean, you're working from home, so you can do it. We don't just go right through and do all of our lessons at once. So short lessons, lots of sensory breaks where their needs are getting met, and you're going to have the most success. So all of that, here's where I want to encourage you. It's going to be hard at the beginning to figure out what your child needs. So first you need to decide, or you need to figure out if your child's a seeker or avoider, and what kind of sensory diet they need. Both of those, I have a post on that I'll put in the description so that you can read it. They go hand in hand. You need to know if your child's a seeker or an avoider, and they can be both for different situations. And then you need to know what kind of input they're craving. So, for example, if they need proprioceptive input, then before math or a hard subject, if they're dyslexic, we'll say reading. If they're dyscalculic, we'll say math. For all neurodivergent kids, we'll say writing. You would go ahead and brush them with their brush, or do joint compressions. I have a post on that. I'll leave in the comments for you. It's going to be hard to figure that out as you learn it. Give yourself grace. You're not always going to figure it out. You're not always going to figure it out correctly. You're going to think your child needs this input when he actually needs this input, and it's going to blow up the whole day. Then you're having an autism rising day and the day is shot. It's okay. There's no behind in homeschool, so you can just go ahead and stop and figure out. There's always tomorrow. Go ahead and stop. Remember that your relationship and your child's safety is paramount and most important. And then you can move on from there. How we learn and become experts in what our child needs in sensory activities, sensory needs, anything like that, is trial and error. We just try. If it works, we keep it. If it doesn't, we set it aside. It may work later. You just keep trying. Give yourself grace. Please, please, please give yourself grace. I'm telling you, you're going to screw this up, and that's okay. You learn so much in those screw ups, more than you do when it's successful. So know that you're going to screw up. Know that, approach it as a learning activity or a learning experience, and just keep trying, because your child deserves to have their sensory needs met in order to live their most successful life. And that's really what we want our kids to do. We want them to have a high quality of life, our typical kids and our neurodivergent kids. And meeting their sensory needs does that for them. So thanks for joining me. You can find me over at our Crazy Adventures in Autism Land. I'm an autism homeschool advocate, speaker, and consultant, or at Special Needs Homeschooling. So you can find the Autism Land one is more geared toward autism. There is homeschooling stuff on it, but it's as it relates to autism. Special Needs Homeschooling has more of the dyslexia, the dyscalculic, things like that. There is autism resources on there as well. And then, of course, you can find me here for the autism stuff, and then you can find me here for the special needs homeschooling stuff. If you have a question, or you're confused, or you know what your child does, but you don't know what kind of sensory he needs, go ahead and shoot me a comment. I'll be happy to help you figure it out, and then we can get you and your child successful together. Thanks.